pitch from another stockbroker 20 years before, and you might be hesitant to jump in on this new thing because you have those scars from the prior experiences that you had. So yeah, in stock brokerage, it has been shown that if you are willing to make the jump and you're not necessarily playing by the tried and true stockbroker playbook, there's an opportunity for massive gains, right? Like you have to be correct and you also have to be on consensus. Because if everybody's in the consensus and they're correct, everybody makes a little bit of money. But if you're in the consensus and you're not correct, everybody loses money. If you're not in the consensus and you're not correct, it doesn't matter because everybody lost money anyway. But you can really get ahead if you are not consensus, but you are correct. And that's something to think about when cultivating PR strategies and marketing strategies for clients, is that so many of these companies are doing the exact same thing. Here's 20 hashtags, like this and tag a friend so that you can be entered into our drawings. The more companies that do that and take those kinds of tactics, the less effective they become. And it is, I don't want to say my job, but it is the job of anyone who's involved in marketing and in PR to figure out what are the inefficiencies in this market and what can we do to exploit them to make our story sing a little bit more loudly. So just in general, Meg gave a really good overview. I don't want to spend too much time talking about myself. I'd rather field questions and hear about what y'all are doing. But just in general, the three things that I do. So primarily right now, I work at a company called Neighborly, formerly known as the Dwyer Group. I started here in February. And yeah, Andrea is a coworker of mine. So at the Dwyer Group, now known as Neighborly, we're a holding company of 25 different franchise brands that are all across the world. So these are brands that you would recognize here in Waco, like Mr. Rooter Plumbing, Mosquito Joe Pest Control, Molly Maid Cleaning Services. If there's something that happens in or around people's homes, we want to have a Neighborly option that they could use for that. So all across the country, there are these franchise brokers who might help Jill Anderson, who's considering buying a franchise. She got some money squirreled away and she just doesn't know what she should do. Jill might employ one of these franchise brokers to help her decide between A, B, and C options. But traditionally, Neighborly didn't really work closely with those brokers because we wanted you to just call us directly, and then we can walk you through all the different opportunities with Neighborly brands. And we pay anywhere between $20,000 to $30,000 for Jill's franchise broker to bring Jill to us if she ends up buying a Mr. Rooter Plumbing. So it wasn't before about 18 months or 2 years ago that Neighborly recognized we're really missing a big opportunity, not having relationships with these brokers. So I was hired in February to create Neighborly's broker relations department. So I spend my 8 to 5 every day interacting with brokers. That I'm doing a lot of marketing to brokers. Primarily LinkedIn is what I'm using for that. But my whole gig here is trying to have relationships with the franchise broker who's representing Jill in hopes that when he brings her 5 different options, that maybe 1 or 2 of them will be a Neighborly brand, something that's in our portfolio. In 2015 of January, my wife and I moved to Waco, and in April 2015 is when we started Pokeyo's. So Pokeyo's is our cookie and ice cream business that's mobile, but we are not the very first Pokeyo's. It's sort of a unique situation. So Julia and I grew up in Dallas, and I graduated high school in 2007. She was 06. And when she was in high school, a place called Pokeyo's opened up near us. This is over by SMU campus in Dallas, right at Mockingbird and Central Expressway. So Julia went into the shop and she loved it, and she ended up being their very first employee. So my wife, Julia, as a 16 or 17-year-old, is baking cookies and scooping ice cream for Pokeyo's. And when we were, go through college, she went to Baylor, I went to A&M. And when we were planning on what to do, once we got married in January 15 and kind of wanted to start a life for ourselves, she pitched them on letting us take their concept and make it mobile. They had one cookie and ice cream shop that's in the shopping center by SMU. It's very much a mom and pop business. But she understood the brand intimately. They felt confident giving her the keys. And so in April 2015 is when we started Pokios in Waco. They were not particularly helpful to us simply because they didn't have any experience with food trucks, right? They'd never been outside of Dallas. So basically, we have a license with Pokios in Dallas where we are allowed to use their cookie recipes and their branding. But everything else about our business has been totally built by us and is unique to us in Waco. So Julia and I started doing that in April 2015. And the reason we moved to Waco actually was because I was supposed to enroll in Baylor Law School. So I'd been accepted to the law school, was supposed to start in the fall of 2015. And in the few months from April until September or so, Pokios just took off like a rocket ship. It was amazing to see how well received it was by the community. And I had very little knowledge about Waco before we moved here in 2015, but it was so clear that the people who lived in Waco really wanted something to be proud of. They wanted something that was exciting, where they could all gather together. And I'd never heard of Fixer Upper before I came here. Fixer Upper became a much bigger and better version of the type of, like intense loyalty, the rabid fans, the raving fans that we were trying to cultivate at Pokios. But it's the same thing, right? Like everybody in Waco, when Fixer Upper came out, just breathed a sigh of relief, because when you go on an airplane now, they ask about Fixer Upper. They don't ask about David Koresh. And we've been able to take a lot of this publicity that Waco has, and we've been able to manufacture that for some of our own goods. So for instance, when they were still doing Fixer Upper, Joanna would have us come out and we would serve when they did the reveal episodes. So it was sweet. Like we got to see the family and see Chip and Joe. But I remember even, the first times we would cater for them, Chip and Joanna would both come out to the truck, we'd visit. Then, the second and third time, maybe just Chip comes out. Then fifth or sixth time, Chip's assistant's coming out. By the 10th time, it's the assistant's assistant. You could just see that these people were getting so much more famous before our very eyes. And we were very blessed to, get to hang on to that rocket ship a little bit and get some exposure. But we never had a desire to be a part of the Magnolia silos, because what they do, being parked permanently there, is very different from what we do. We are a strictly mobile business. And so the marketing is very important for Pokios. How are we reaching people and letting them know where we are? Because once again, we're not in a permanent location every single day. And then last thing I want to mention, and then I'll open it up to those questions that you have, Meg, is that in September of 2016, I, made a lot of connections doing Pokio stuff, and I would hear stories from other food truck owners or people that I would meet while I was working of this restaurant's coming in on Austin Avenue, or did you hear that place is closing? And I wasn't seeing this stuff written about in the newspaper. And Mike Copeland is the fellow who writes the business news for the Waco Trib. And it's just frankly logistically impossible for Mike to be sharing all of the good information that's happening in the Waco business scene. So I approached the NPR station in town, KWBU 103.3. I said, hey, I used to do radio back when I was in college. Here's my reel. I also am a small business owner in Waco. Would you give me an opportunity to talk to other small business owners, civic leaders, and engaged citizens about this renaissance that Waco is experiencing? Because if we don't track this change, we're going to blink and all of Waco has become a totally unique place where we didn't, really follow along the steps. So that was the whole purpose of Downtown Depot, was to highlight some of these underreported or unreported stories of success in the Waco community. And I'm really grateful that the show is still on the air. I've done 87 episodes thus far. So they air on the first and third Fridays of every month on 103.3. And then afterwards, they're available on Apple Podcasts and the NPR app, and really anywhere you would get your podcasts. But kind of funny story about the show is that I told them I want to do this show. It's called Downtown Depot. They were pretty skeptical, understandably so. I haven't done radio in 4 or 5 years. But they said, we're sure not going to let you go live, but if you want to come in here and record something, we can see what it's like. What they didn't know is that my little sister is married to a guy named Nick Deaver, whose dad is the mayor, Kyle Deaver. So I showed up to my very first conversation with Kyle Deaver, the mayor of Waco, as my guest. And at that point, I got a lot of credibility. And that validated me with the radio station, where they've given me a really long leash. I often do stories on Downtown Depot that are not business specific. They're more culturally relevant. For instance, maybe 3 episodes ago, I had on Chief Ryan Holt, who's the chief of police for the Waco department, and wanted to talk about George Floyd and the ongoing national protests against police brutality. So I'm really grateful that the station has given me a wide berth. And once again, I don't see myself as a master of anything. I love being, 10% deep, 20% deep across a lot of disciplines. And the setup of Downtown Depot allows me to do that, because I get to bring an expert in, and for 20 minutes, I get to grill them on questions. And something that's very fundamental to me is that I'm so willing to look like an idiot in the short term, knowing that I will be smarter in the long term. So that's one of the most common pieces of feedback I get from Downtown Depot is that your interview style seems so conversational. And I feel like you're asking the questions that if I was a person in that seat, I would ask too. And I caught myself a couple years into Downtown Depot finding that I wanted to be the expert. So say someone would come on and talk about real estate, and 5 minutes before I'm like Googling real estate terms so I can sound smart. And then I just realized, first off, there are other legitimate real estate professionals who are in Waco. I could have them come on and address these issues and shine a spotlight on them. And then secondly, I can make myself more approachable and more relatable to my listeners if I'm not acting like I'm an expert on every single thing. If I'm willing to be dumb in the short term, dumb, quote unquote, I really think there's a ton of long-term benefit to that. So I'm very much the guy who's willing to get down in the dirt with you and ask the easy, simple questions, because I think that iteratively that's going to pay off in the long term. So just love being in Waco, love communicating. And yeah, that's my basic story.
That is terrific. I love your overview. I think a lot of us are in PR because we're a little bit ADD and we like to do a little bit of this and a little bit of that and not too deep. And I think a lot of us may be on your page there. So, one of the things I think is really interesting about Pokios is it was a new business and it didn't have a place. So what was your, I guess, especially in the launch, I'm interested in how you did that. Was it a huge social media thing? How did you tell people where you were?
So when we moved to Waco, we decided we really want to be in downtown. That's the spot for us. So Julia, my wife, and I rented an apartment at the Praetorian building at 6th and Franklin. And we negotiated with that building owner to allow us to charge our truck overnight in the parking lot of the Praetorian. So every morning when people are on that commute coming downtown, we're getting maybe 5,000, 10,000 cars who are passing by Pokios as they're on their way to work. But secondly, is that Pokios is so benefited by being mobile, right? Like we stay top of mind because you just saw us pull out of your neighborhood. When we were starting, I would go take our truck and I would just drive around even before Pokios was open, because I wanted people to get excited about, okay, there is something that's called Pokios, it's coming. And I think that did help us retain followers, because they had heard about us and then they wanted to find us. But in terms of building that initial customer base, Meg, it was purely social media and word of mouth. We did not do paid posts on Facebook or Instagram, frankly, because we didn't feel like we had the budget for that. And even still today, paid marketing is not something that we typically do. We have gotten to the point now that our network is large enough that the message gets out to the people that we really need it to. And of course, there's some people on Instagram or Facebook who just don't see our stuff because we're not paying, and that's the name of the game. But we would rather take that money and pay it towards our employees, because I think that if you come to Pokios and you have an employee who's not making $2.13 an hour and someone whose time and value is respected, they're going to give a much better experience to that customer. And that customer is who's going to go on to Google and leave a review about Pokios. That is so much more valuable than me pinging 100 other people with a picture of an ice cream sandwich that they probably don't care about. So we've always been really focused on not spending our money on marketing and trying to put our money into investing in our people. But I think one reason why we were able to gain such a large following, and right now, I need to look at exactly, but I think we have about 16,000 followers on Instagram, and about probably like 12, 13 on Facebook. We stopped doing Twitter a while ago because Twitter is really its own world, and either you need to dive into it and be participating in all these crazy threads and do the challenges, or your messaging kind of just gets lost there. So it wasn't really what we needed. But I think that we were able to cultivate a large following because you literally had to follow us in order to know where the truck was. Unless you happen to drive by and you see the Pokios truck there, there's no way that you could know where you could get cookies and ice cream. We don't have a physical location that you can go visit. So there was a utility in following Pokios. And that's something that we've been really intentional about since day one is if we're posting a piece of content, it is going to have useful, actionable information. So it's always going to be a picture of cookies or ice cream. They're going to be in there somewhere. Like you'll never look at the Pokios account and there's like a selfie of me on the beach. That's just not what we're about, right? We are going to give you cookies and ice cream in every single photo, and we're going to give you actionable info about where we're going to be that day, where you can find us. So like maybe our pictures are cute, or I know that at least colloquially, we were one of the first food brands in Waco to start doing like food in the sky, where you sort of have like the sky background and then your piece of food that's hanging out there. So I think that we got some traction just because of the style of the photos a little bit, but mostly I would attribute it to the necessity for following Pokios if you did want to get cookies and ice cream. And once again, if Pokios opened today, it would not be as successful as it was when it opened in 2015. We came here at a really sweet time, like right before Magnolia was this crazy thing. We have much more competition these days. When we were here, we were, I think, the only mobile dessert vendor. And there are now a couple of mobile dessert vendors that are in town. So we kind of get eaten at both sides from competition because maybe a bakery opens up that does terrific cookies, and maybe a frozen yogurt place opens up or a rolled ice cream place opens up, and they're eating at us on the cookie side and on the ice cream side. So we've really needed to lean into what differentiates us, and that is the fact that we're mobile. So we had a store inside the Hilton Hotel for about 9 months, and we had been renting kitchen space at the Hilton. So we just worked out a deal with them to put a couple freezers in there and let people come by. But ultimately, it was just more confusing than it was really financially beneficial. So we closed that in the fall of 2019, and that's when we bought a second truck, not knowing COVID was happening. But it's been an amazing thing to have during COVID because, for instance, like starting today at noon through Sunday night, we have both trucks booked basically from noon until 11 p.m. for Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and most of Sunday. So having those two trucks really has helped us because we're doing a lot more on-demand stuff. Meg, I'm so sorry if I didn't answer what your question was. I'm kind of rambling here today.
That's great. So yeah, I think it's really interesting the way you've used social media and then you're not paying for it. So how have you seen social media trends change over these 5 years? Have you had to change up what you're doing, or is a cool picture?
Yeah, so we definitely have less interaction with our posts than we used to, and fewer people are seeing our posts. And I haven't really done a deep dive into which of our posts are being seen, and are they being seen more on Facebook, are they being seen more on Instagram, because once again, like, I would much rather spend my time focusing on our employees that I think are going to drive us traffic, rather than just simply hitting X thousand number of people who live in a certain area. But one thing that has been nice that we have done, and this is the only time when we do paid ads. And when we're doing a paid ad, it's maybe we're spending $5 or $10 on it. We do not budget $1,000 a month for Facebook ads. Is that during COVID, we are doing a lot more targeted marketing because we're going to these neighborhoods specifically. So the days of Pokeos parking outside of Dichotomy from 6 to 10 p.m., those are over for now. But we know every Wednesday night, we're going to go to Twin Rivers and we're going to park at the clubhouse there. So we'll send a geo-targeted ad to a small group of people who live within maybe 5 miles of that and let them know we're going to be in their neighborhood for that evening. So that's one thing that I would, that's at least what's changed for us strategy-wise, is let's try to do a lot more location-based targeting if we are going to be spending money for it. But otherwise, let's just keep on putting out good content, and people don't interact with it as much. Like, we used to put out a picture of an ice cream sandwich and it'd be like 350 or 400 likes. Now we put out a picture and it's maybe 50 or 60 likes. So to me, that's not that our ice cream sandwiches are any less delicious. It's simply that we're not paying the overlord, and therefore our pictures are not showing up on as many people's feeds. I'm telling you, it is almost morally impossible to see a delicious ice cream sandwich in your feed and not just double tap it. I do it every single time. So I know that it's because we're just getting shifted down. And frankly, I don't know if you guys have restaurant clients. It is the same thing with Yelp, where we have great reviews on Yelp, but we don't pay Yelp. We've never paid Yelp anything. And it's because if you get started paying Yelp, they've got you over a barrel. And they have the ability to go in and to highlight, they won't just flat out delete things, but they do, as part of their normal practice, highlight certain reviews, whether they be good or bad. So like for us, if somebody puts a bad review on Yelp and we're not a Yelp customer, that review shows up right up top. And I have other friends who use Yelp and they spend a lot of money and all their bad reviews get pushed down to the bottom and nobody really sees it. And I'm telling you, like, I have a number of restaurant friends who went really hard on Yelp in the beginning. And then every 2 or 3 months ago, they get like a mob style phone call from the Yelp boss. Like, hey, you know, like, when are we going to up your bit? It's silly, and it's just the way that it is. So if you want to play that game, you have to participate in it. But we've just largely decided to not play the paid marketing game and try to let our customer service and our product speak for itself.
Cool. We have a chat question. Dr. Burleson would like to know who your photographer is.
When we first started, it was my wife and me. Now we try to use photographs of customers. So if they tag us, they'll give us permission. And we actually have an incentive deal set up. I think it's like 10% or 20% off of your order next time if you tag a photo and we end up using it on social media. But yeah, primarily it was my wife and me. But starting in February of this year, like I said, I began working at Neighborly. So I'm up here 8 to 5. I'm not doing day-to-day stuff with Pokeos. So right now, any photos that you see would either be my wife or one of our employees, or it would have been a customer who had tagged us in their photograph.
Okay, so you're not doing professional stuff?
No, yeah, not, I mean, like, this is $1,000 camera. I know we don't think of it like that. We think of it like a phone, or we think of it like a computer or my email source, but this is a camera. And, you know, I teach a class I was teaching it through McLennan County, and now I've started just doing them on my own at Hustle, the co-working space downtown. But it's called Learn to Podcast. And it's when I teach people how to make your own podcast. And what you don't realize is that if you have an iPhone or any sort of smartphone, you're literally 90% of the way there technologically to making your own podcast. Now, maybe make a podcast and only your grandma and you want to listen to it, and so be it, but that doesn't prevent literally millions of other people from creating their podcast either. A lot of people think it's the technological gap that's preventing them from participating in this totally new and exciting medium of podcasting. And really, you have the world at your fingertips if you have a smartphone.
That's cool. Okay, we have another chat question. Austin, did you leverage business partnerships in the Waco area as you were growing your Pokios business?
So I got hired at Neighborly in February. I don't want to say there's a direct correlation, but we catered for Neighborly probably 10 times. And we'd send the Pokios truck over here, and I often was the person who would come and deliver the cookies. So the people at Neighborly, yeah, Andrea can speak.
At work, let me just say.
But yeah, so it's definitely, I think like from Neighborly's perspective, if they were considering me and someone who looked the same on paper, but they would recognize, okay, this is someone who has a lot of connections within the Waco business community because he's been, doing business with them for the last 4 or 5 years. That might have been what ended up landing me this job, was our business that we had built with Pokios. But yeah, I really am big on building the business connections, and thank you for that question, because it ends up like there's 2 reasons why you do it. One is you get to have a personal relationship with someone, and you're going to end up getting better service from that person and more kindness, more respect from that person if you've made the effort to build that relationship. But secondly, oftentimes there's a financial incentive to do that as well. Like at Freddie Quiche, where we go take our truck, we will go and cater for Freddie Quiche and say, hey, we're going to come serve all 25 of your employees. Maybe it's $200. And hey, next time we have a car in, just give us a $200 credit and we'll take it off that way. $200 for me costs more than $200 of Freddie Quiche. And like $200 of cookies and ice cream for me costs a lot less than $200 of cookies and ice cream for Freddie Quiche. So I think that relationships like that, the trade relationship, not every business is down for it. And I always couch it with, hey, love your service, love your product. I am 1,000% willing to pay full price here. But if you think that your clients or your employees in this instance might feel loved and respected and honored by a special treat, let us come and provide that for you. It's really good for employee retention. It's great for celebrating birthdays and stuff like that. So yeah, we do a lot of work with companies that way, where we try to do trades and we just build relationships through that.
Cool. Well, it's nice to have something that everybody wants, huh? Ice cream.
Yeah, that's the beauty of it. It really, like, if you're gluten-free, we have gluten-free cookies. The only thing that we don't have is any products for diabetic people. Bluebell, we use exclusively Bluebell products for our ice cream, and they don't do a no sugar version. They do a no sugar added vanilla, but there's nothing that's no sugar. And we also don't have vegan products. So those are the 2 things that we will look into. And we're always sampling different coconut milk based ice creams and trying to find something that would work for a vegan community. But frankly, our model right now is so simple and it works that I'm a little bit discouraged to really try to get in there, particularly now that I'm so busy with Neighborly. But yeah, I'm a bit discouraged to try to go and throw a monkey wrench in there just to please a few people. Because largely folks are really happy with cookies and ice cream, and specifically chocolate chip and vanilla. I know it sounds boring, but it's classic for a reason.
You did have a little bit of a PR issue this year. One of your employees tested positive for COVID, and I know you shut down for a short amount of time. Walk us through how you communicated with that. Was it up to you to be public about it? Is that something you chose? Why did you make the choices you did? And
so the employee called our manager, Elle, the morning that they found out that they were COVID positive. And at that point, Elle called me, and Julia and Elle and I all got on a phone call about it. There's a lot of ways that you could handle something like this. And thankfully, our COVID positive was a little bit later in the cycle. Like you saw some of the first restaurants or businesses that test positive for COVID, and it's like, here's a huge press release. We're going on the news to talk about this. And I felt at that point that a response like that would be a little bit overblown. So really, Meg, our thinking was, we are the first, maybe the first food truck that this has happened to that, knows and wants to be transparent about it. There are probably going to be more that happen after this, to the point where like someone in your office contracting COVID is not a news story. That's just something that everyone in 2020 is having to deal with. So we certainly don't want to blow this out of proportion. But secondly, we're a food business and we're mobile. We're traveling around everywhere. And so what we decided to do in our response, Meg, was to lean into what we had been doing the whole time, which is when we make our post, we have a little addendum that we add on, which is our employees are wearing masks and gloves the entire time. As people are congregating outside of the truck, we encourage you to stand at least 6 feet apart from each other. But obviously, like, you have to decide if you're going to be breathing on the neck of the person behind you. So we basically just reiterated those points. And of course, went even harder on, these are the ways we've sanitized and sterilized the truck and our kitchen area. Anybody who has worked with this employee in the last 2 weeks is going to be taking a hiatus right now. And we did shut down the truck, which thankfully, that's something where we're very benefited with Pokeos, that I have this job at Neighborly, because we can afford to make safety the priority. It's like, hey, we're going to cease operations in the truck for 14 days. We're just not going to take the truck out. And what we started doing in that interim while the truck was closed is we got a lot more aggressive with cookie deliveries and with making cookie cakes. So thankfully for us, it's pretty easy to make money even if the truck isn't out running actively, because we do have a lot of things that people like to order.
Okay, interesting. You are also running your podcast and your Waco Business News, and so you interact with a lot of other people. And you've talked about how you got into that. Have you learned interesting things like business practices or things that you translated from yourself when you talk to somebody else about their business?
So this is the best thing that I've learned, and it's not industry specific. The best thing I've learned is the power of the pause. So I'm in a conversation with someone and I just asked them, what's the hardest thing about running your dry cleaners? And they give me their 30-second or a minute answer. My tendency is to follow up with the next question and to fill that awkward silence. But what I found is that if I'm willing to press the pause button on myself and let there be some awkward distance in between us, oftentimes the question asker or the question answerer follows up with a response that is so much better than what they gave me the first time. Like, the first time was the boilerplate answer. The second time is what they really wish that they had had the courage to say initially, but for some reason didn't. So you can get a lot of information out of people if you're willing to be a part of that awkwardness and let the silence be there. So that's been really useful for me in my communication, particularly here at Neighborly, because I'm talking with these franchise brokers all the time. And if they had their way, they would all have their own podcasts and I would listen to that, and they would just talk and I never listened. I never really talk myself. So this has been really good training for me at Neighborly to recognize, okay, so while this franchise broker calls me to tell me about his client, in his mind, he's Brad Pitt and I am in the movie theater just watching and observing. So I can either try to one-up him and be the Robert De Niro character, or I can just recognize, okay, this is not my time to shine right now. This is my time to listen and to grow and to hopefully find some actionable items that I can take and benefit my company. But I really think that if you're talking, there's no way that you can learn something new, right? Maybe you have some sense of self-discovery, but I'm not learning anything about myself right now answering this question. If I shut up and Kathy were telling me her thoughts on this question, then yes, I would learn something from that. But that's been probably the biggest takeaway for me from doing the show, is simply that I have the power to control how much I learn. And for me personally, that's mostly based on how much I'm talking and how much I'm willing to shut up.
Do you have a journalism background? That's a good journalism trick.
I do have a journalism background. So at Texas A&M, the English program is split up into 3 different tracks, and I graduated in the creative writing track. So my degree is in creative writing, and while I was in school, I wrote for the A&M newspaper, and I covered the sports teams, and I worked for a local publication after that. So, and that's kind of what I thought Waco Business News was going to be. The idea was to make a publication all online that is sort of similar to the Dallas Business Journal or something that's more hard news. And Downtown Depot was just going to be the podcast that Waco Business News does, but we're also routinely doing interviews with developers and updating people on permits pulled. But I ended up just running out of steam to do all of that. And the podcast is the part that is more easily digestible for folks. So I've spent my energy on that. But I do definitely think that there is a need for additional business reporting in Waco for someone who has that journalistic tendency.
Gary has a question for you.
Yeah.
Gary, do you want to ask it?
Hi, Austin. This is Gary Joyner. I work at the Texas Farm Bureau. You mentioned Bluebell ice cream. In some ways, you're co-branded with Bluebell because of the popularity of that creamery. From a public relations standpoint, when they were experiencing some of their difficulties in Brenham in terms of processing, how did you react? How did you respond? What was your engagement with the public at that point to talk about your product?
So we had been open for about 2 weeks when all of our Bluebell ice cream got recalled. It was a major buzzkill for us. And we had our supply chain set up. We loved all the flavors. We loved the delivery schedule. And so thankfully, people hadn't really associated Pokey's cookies with Bluebell ice cream at that point. So we ended up just using a different distributor of ice cream, or a different flavor of ice cream, a different company of ice cream, producer of ice cream, that we ordered through Benny Keith. That was not as delicious as Bluebell, and it cost more than Bluebell. So what that allowed us to do is, while it was a bit of a bummer initially, when we got our Bluebell back in full stock, maybe 9 months later or a year later, we really heavily marketed, hey, just so you know, all those Bluebell flavors that you've been missing, you can come get them at Pokey's. And when we had our store inside the Hilton, we bought a upright 2-door freezer, and we started ordering pints and half gallons from Bluebell, where we would order any flavor that they had in production. We would order that flavor. So at the Hilton in Waco, we actually had the largest collection of Bluebell ice creams, largest variety of Bluebell ice creams of anywhere besides Brenham at the factory. Because when you go to H-E-B, maybe they have 7 or 10 different flavors, but they need space for Ben & Jerry's and the gelato. For us, we're 100% Bluebell. So there's this one flavor that they did seasonally last year. It's called Mardi Gras King's Cake. And they put it out, and it went like hotcakes. And I had a couple who called me from Dallas to ask if we had any of it left in stock. We had 2 half gallons, and they drove down immediately with a freezer full of dried ice, and they bought these 2 half gallons from us. So we were able to become a little bit of a retailer for Bluebell there, and especially for people who live in downtown Waco. If you're jonesing for some ice cream, you got to drive up to the Valley Mills H-E-B or the Bellmead H-E-B, or maybe one of the corner stores is down here, but likely they don't have the variety or the flavor you want. So the fact that we were open inside of the hotel until 11 p.m., that made us the go-to late night spot for a lot of people in downtown when they were craving something sweet.
Cool. Let's see. I wanted to ask you a couple questions about the podcast. A lot of times those of us who are in certain venues get a little encouragement to start some kind of podcast, but I think there's a lot to it. So one of my questions is, so you and I sent you some questions beforehand to kind of let you know where we were going and the ideas. Do you do that for your Downtown Depot people, or do you just surprise them?
I don't. I surprise them. Thankfully, yeah. I mean, there are enough episodes at this point, Meg, where if someone is asking me, it's like, what are we going to talk about? What I'll say is I start every episode off by asking you what your Waco history is. That can be a 30-second answer. That can be a 5-minute answer. But outside of having that first question, I really don't script it very much. I do a ton of my own research. So I come in with things that I want to talk about. But depending upon how they receive that, what's your Waco history question, that will be dependent upon what we ask. Because sometimes I had this guy on a couple weeks ago named Bill Wetterman, who's a real estate developer. And Bill started talking to me about the intersection of Valley Mills and Bosque Boulevard. And there used to be some restaurant there in the 1960s that you go to. And it's like long before I was even born, much less lived in Waco. But there are people who listen to Downtown Depot who are old Waco types and love hearing these remembrances of cruising down the valley. So I try to let my guests they help me dictate the questions that we're going to have. So yeah, to answer your question, I do a lot of research myself, but no, I do not send questions to them. And very rarely do I let them know what we're going to talk about. But they know, if they've listened to the show, that I'm not really trying to throw curveballs at them. I'm really here to ask dumb questions about, maybe dumb is not the right word, surface level questions, right? Like, I'm not trying to get into the weeds. We have a wide-ranging audience on this show. And so people know that I'm going to have an honest conversation with them about something that is their area of expertise, and most people are willing to do that.
Okay. I heard you say earlier that you do a class on podcasting. Maybe you give us a little quick and free advice from your class.
Totally.
If anyone's thinking about starting a podcast.
Yeah. So and a lot of these best practices of podcasting have only emerged in the last 2 or 3 years, because so many more people are podcasting. Podcasting is growing so much because there's so many more people who have smartphones, and podcasting is the most essential form of communication. It's literally, at its base level, just me and Meg having a conversation. That's something people have been doing for millennia. But now it gets to be recorded, and you can hear two experts talk about something that interests you. So there's such a growing appetite for podcasting. A lot of stats that I can't think of off the top of my head, but one of the wackier ones is that maybe there's 7 million podcasts that are out there, but only about 30% of podcasts have been listened to more than 10 times. So there's a ton. It's going. I eventually see podcasting being kind of like Facebook, where everybody has a Facebook profile, even if you don't use it often. I do think that we're going to get to the point where most people, at least, have a podcast or a YouTube channel, because everybody wants to be individual. And for some people, it's not really important whether there are 100,000 followers or there are 100 followers, as long as those 100 followers are rabid fans. If there are people who are interested in what I'm doing, if they give me the feedback that I'm looking for, people are willing to have even a small audience if it is loyal. So that would be one of my things. If you're thinking about starting a podcast, I would not suggest having a podcast where you and your best friend break down the last episode of The Bachelorette. Like, there's a lot of those, and they're probably with people who are much funnier than you. Let's be real. But I had an older woman who took my class a few months ago, and she had heard about podcasting, but she didn't know what it was. And she saw it in the McLennan roster that got mailed to her. And so she just signed up for it. It was hilarious. And so we had some like technological issues that I needed to explain to her. But once she realized that, she got kind of discouraged. Like, okay, so I have an iPhone. You're telling me this is really easy. I have no idea what I would talk about. And so ask her what she's into, and come to find out she's a major green thumb and has been gardening really beautiful stuff in Waco for 30 years. I said, hey, like, there's probably a small group of people who care about how to cultivate a certain type of plant in a Central Texas climate. But there are definitely people who are interested in that. And the beauty of the internet is that it connects you with all of those people who believe like the wacky, random, crazy thing that you do, or the thing that you want to explore. It's out there. So I encouraged her, even if you like think there's not going to be 1,000 people who listen to it, and likely there won't be, you should totally start this podcast, because it's information that will be really useful for some people. And ultimately, you should not start a podcast because you see it as a money-making venture. You should start a podcast because it's something that interests you intimately and you want to pursue more deeply. Very, very few people who start a podcast will ever monetize it. It really needs to be something where this is a topic that I want to explore. If I can have a landing page and that allows me to book a cool guest, like somebody whose book I read, and I can get them to come on my podcast and it's just me and I get to learn about it. That's so useful. And I think that that's the better and the more realistic way to view podcasting. But if you do a podcast, you should have at least 5 episodes in the can before you ever publish it. Because the worst thing is if you put your podcast out, everybody loves it, and then they have to wait a week to hear another episode. So have a few episodes in the can. I would release all of those at once, or at least maybe 3 or 4 of them at once. And then you would get on a cadence, whether it's every week or every 2 weeks, whatever you want yours to be, and be consistent with the content that you're putting out. Those would be my general thoughts.
Okay. So in the chat here, I'm going to save a couple of these housekeeping ones for the end. I'm going to work on getting that link for you, but Kathy has a question.
I just wondered who has been your favorite local interview that maybe surprised you, either because of, the person or the topic or the business, that just kind of, there was something about it that took a turn that was surprising, that you thought was one of the most interesting ones that you've done?
Okay, so I'm looking up Downtown Depot on Apple Podcasts right now to refresh myself. But recently, I already mentioned it, but the conversation with Ryan Holt, who is the chief of police in Waco, and he's also the assistant city manager. So he's got a foot in both the civilian camp and the law enforcement camp. But one of the things that I pressed him on is this idea of defunding the police that's been in a lot of people's minds lately, and trying to get him to, I basically got him to admit that what we agreed upon, I should say, is that the police are asked to do way too much, and we're asking them to be an expert marksman and also an expert conflict resolution, and they need to be able to diagnose someone's mental health within 5 or 10 seconds of seeing them and talking to them. And so Officer Holt and I did come to the understanding that currently we have way too much on the shoulders of police, and that defunding the police, not abolishing the police, but defunding them and taking some of those funds and allocating it toward other services is something that he would be willing to listen to and talk about in Waco. So that was a really exciting one. Another one I liked. So November 1st, 2019, I interviewed a guy named Vic Fizell. So if you guys are Waco people, you're probably familiar with Vic's story. He was an attorney who was the district attorney in Waco. He represented a serial killer named Henry Lee Lucas and got into a big fracas with the Texas Rangers and ended up suing the Texas Rangers. It was a wild story that he explained to me on the episode, and I didn't understand the magnitude of it until I watched a series on Netflix called The Confession Killer, which is about Henry Lee Lucas. And if you're into true crime stuff, I would highly suggest the Confession Killer series on Netflix. And Vic is in that. So I got to hear Vic tell me about, on Downtown Depot, the story of Henry Lee Lucas. But in our 20-minute interview, I didn't have any of the backstory. So I was able to go back and fill in some of the details there. But yeah, that, Kathy, to answer your question, the story of Vic Fizell is one of the wackier things that I have ever heard of. And especially watching the film, it made it a lot more understandable to me just what if a big deal this was. Like, the U.S. federal government literally changed libel law. So it used to be that if you were in a libel suit and you got damages from that, your damages would not be taxed. Well, after his fracas with the Texas Rangers, which he ended up winning, the federal government, probably at the behest of the Texas Rangers, Vic would claim, retroactively changed libel laws so that they are taxable, and dated it back so that Vic had to pay taxes on that big settlement that he had gotten. So something that was like a $60 million settlement ended up being, I think, less than $8 million, and that was before other things are taken out. So yeah, Waco just has, JB Smith is one of the writers for the Waco Trib, and he's come on the show before, and we always talk about how Waco is the best little news town in the world. Like per capita, crazier stuff happens here than it does anywhere else, and there's something in the water, and I'm very happy with that because it just creates a unique and interesting place to live.
That's awesome. I'm sure that Vic is interesting. And I guess I have to watch that series. I thought his money came from a Dallas TV station.
Watch the series. It's possible that you're right and I've got some of the details wrong, but I know in general that's what the story was.
Money. All right. I think we better wrap it up. Our professors have asked if they could use this recording in their classes. I will warn Avery, especially who had to come late, that we did start a little late because I didn't know we needed to record it. So it starts a little bit late. So you might
Yes, of course. No, I would be honored.
Stuff in there. And I will figure out how to send that to you.
Cool.
To the rest of you. Okay, so I think we better have our contest. Okay, so these are going to be the rules. I have a trivia question about Pokios. And I think that what we will do is type the answers into the chat. Type the answer into the chat. So you know how to do that. I think enough of you are in the chat. You know how to do that. The messaging, the place to type is at the bottom, and make sure that it's going to everyone. And the answer is a number, and we're going to play Price is Right rules, the closest without going over. And the prize is a gift certificate for 2 Pokios, and you'll just have to get on Instagram and find out where they are. And Kathy will do that online and send you the card. So if it's somebody who's not a member, you may have to put in your email address for us to get that to you. Okay, so here is the question. You know, Pokio sells several different things, but their big thing is the ice cream sandwich. And so how many total did they sell in the year 2019, all year long? And everybody just type in the thing. And if there's an absolute tie, whoever types it first will win. Nobody has a guess yet? Okay, I've got one guess. Okay. All right, has everybody participated that wants to? I've got Julie, Kathy, Andrea. Okay, there's another one, Avery. All right. All right, is that everybody? Say something if you want me to wait.
Now I feel like I'm low. Can I take it back? Looking at everybody else's.
I should have added to my rules. One guess. Okay. Real number, drum roll, is 29,417.
Nice.
At the very end there, Avery pushed out Gary, and Avery looks like the winner.
Avery, oh, good job.
Avery. Good job. Yeah.
That's a fun stat, Meg. I didn't know that. That's great.
I got it from your manager, Elle.
She would know. She's the one.
All right. Thank you guys so much for being here. If there's anybody else who has a question, ask it quickly. And otherwise, I think we will be dismissed. And thank you.
Yeah, I'm going to put my phone number in the chat here.
Awesome.
And I'll also put my email address. So that's my email address for Wake Up Business News and Downtown Depot stuff. So I saw someone had asked about a link to the podcast class. I have not scheduled any because the place where I was doing it at the co-working space, it's been closed for COVID. It might be open now, I'm not sure. But I don't have anything scheduled. But I have done a For instance, it was for the Greater Waco Chambers Youth Council or the Young Professionals Group. Like I did a class on podcasting for the Young Professionals Group at the Waco Chamber. So like if your PR society wanted to do it or your class wanted to do it, Avery, in your case, I would be happy to, maybe come down to UMHB and we can talk. But yeah, that's a class that I have the curriculum and it's easy for me. It's about a 2-hour class, but you'll come away knowing what you need to do to start a podcast, and hopefully we can source some good ideas too. So if you're interested in any of that or just want to visit, email me, call me, and we can chat.
Okay, great. I think I answered the wrong question. I gave them the link to your podcast on KWBU.
Oh, that's great information as well.
Did you say it was, so it's, you just do that individually, not through MCC, the podcast?
I was doing it through MCC, and then I started doing it individually because it was just easier and I made more money. So
cool. All right. Wonderful. Thank you all for coming on this topic. Be sure and join KWBU as a member and be a supporter. Also, wear a mask, don't touch your face, and don't have a party at your house.
Amen.
Thank you, Austin. That was awesome.
Thanks, Austin.
Bye.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you.
Thank you all.
Bye,
Appreciate
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Bye.